Hi, you. It's me, Nicole Phoenix Star, and this is the Nick Star podcast. I am coming to you this week from a house sit down in Brisbane, and it is epic. We're in a 5-level townhouse thing. It's gorgeous with this beautiful ragdoll 13-year-old cat called Chester in the suburb of Paddington, and it's been so fun, and yeah, it feels like a vacation. It's really wonderful. Leo's really getting into this house sitting life, and yeah, really getting a taste for what this new year of not having a home base will feel like. And we do have a 1-month sit coming up after this in a completely different vibe. And yeah, so much diversity. It feels exciting every day. It's very interesting. I had a conversation with my mother when I was staying with them last week, which also felt very vacation-ish because, for so many years, for a decade, I would come back from Bali and quite often stay some of the time with them, although in a different apartment. And yeah, there was that underlining familiarness. Um, Although the room I was sleeping in was not awesome. It was really, really hot, and it didn't have great ventilation, and the fan wasn't working properly, and the air conditioning was in the other part of the apartment and not in my room. Anyway, I just accepted what is. Anyway, I was having this conversation with my mother, and she goes, "Do you think you'll ever buy another house?" And I went, "No." She goes, "Wouldn't you love a place of your own?" I went, "No. Like, I've explained this to you, but let's have a conversation about it." Because, she's very much from a generation that you grew up, got a job, got a mortgage, had a house, and that was a very normal thing to do and a very achievable thing to do for most vast majority of people. Because, when you're like your own place with your own things, and I said, no, I just don't value that. Like, my highest values are freedom and adventure. And when I did have my own house, I felt trapped. She's like, oh, it's such a unusual way to think, Nicole. I mean, is it? I said, yeah, I know it is, but people have been told for so long that that's success, but most people spend their whole life in a form of stress trying to meet all of that and unable to kind of have much freedom or adventure out of it. She goes, "Oh, I guess." And she goes, "Well, like, what if you had all the money in the world? Would you buy something? And what would it be?" And I was like, look, if I could buy something and it didn't make a blip in my financial situation, maybe, but like, I don't have any part of me that wants to own anything. Like, it just seems weird to me. And she's just looking at me, trying to understand where I'm coming from. She goes, "Well, what would you buy?" And I went, "A castle." She looked at me and went, Nik.xoxo would. And I said, it's just such a weird conversation for me, Mum, because I just have no aspiration to buy anything. Like, so often tenants are difficult. There is so much maintenance a lot of the time, and it just seems like a headache. She's like, yeah, but you can't have all your things. I went, all the things I have, I am more than enough. Like I still have things, and but and when I have stayed in different places, I just buy the things I need, and then I just give them away or sell them. I'm not attached to them. She's like, oh, you've always been different, Nicole. And I went, yeah, I know. Anyway, so that has kind of been lingering a little bit as, we kind of stepped into this place and not really knowing what it was like and having the joy of it being super cool and the kitchen being amazing. And me having all my things, like, I bought a travel air fryer because that's on my high values of list to be able to maintain my nourishment and nurturing of self. And I have my one fabulous pot that I'm able to cook everything in, and I was able to bring a big pan because they dropped us off and they're picking us up. And I do have a house sit in Melbourne later in the year that I'm flying in for, and I'll have a smaller kind of routine ritual bag than I do now. Yeah. And a couple of days ago, I came across this post where this guy who is a digital nomad was sharing some information about him. And then he shared this thing, which I'm going to read to you, which I found insightful and aligned for me. And he wrote, it's from the internet. Number 1, the Montessori family of Florence has kept wealth through wars, revolutions, and 5 economic collapses. When asked their secret, the patriarch said only, "We never sleep twice under the same roof." At first it sounded poetic, but the reasoning was surgical. 2. The rule was born in the 1600s when merchants were hunted for gold taxes. Constant relocation protected their assets, but over time the family realized the ritual had a deeper effect. It prevented comfort from turning into blindness. Stability dulls instinct, one descendant said. Movement sharpens it. 3. Modern neuroscientists would agree changing environments resets the brain's reticular activating system, the filter that decides what you notice. Stay in one place too long and your perception narrows. You stop seeing opportunity because everything looks familiar, wrote behavioral economist Luca Bonini. Number 4. So even today, the Montessorians rotate between villas in Florence, Milan, and Lake Como. They travel like pack routines into briefcases and treat permanence as a liability. Every roof has a gravity, the eldest daughter says. If you rest too long under it, it starts owning you. And I was like, ooh, yeah. I've spent so much of the last decade moving around a lot. I get that. Like, I love long stays, and a long stay is like 3 months. 3 months is epic. You unpack, you get comfortable, and then you get ready for the next adventure. And you have that real sense of home, and I don't know, like it's, I understand people that like their space and their history and all of those things. And like, there's no judgment here. Like, everyone has their own thing. But for me, I'm just sharing my experience on what works for me. I find slow travel really expansive. And like I said to my mum, I said, you know, the last place I lived the longest was during high school when we lived in Andrews Avenue. And she's like, yeah, we lived there for 7 years. And I said, she said, you lived there for 7 years. And I went, yeah, yeah. And I said, I haven't lived anywhere for longer than 20 months since 22 months. That's the longest I've ever stayed anywhere. And that was my last place in Bali. And before that, I hadn't stayed anywhere for longer than 18 months since I was 18. In the last 34 years, I've moved every 3, 6, 12, 18 months. She's like, oh my God, I would hate that. I went, I know. And that's not your jam. I said, for me, it makes me feel alive, and life is an adventure, and it fuels me and fills me. And I find I don't know, like, there was that stage just before I had the vision of Leo going to boarding school. I'm like, I am so comfortable. Like, I am so comfortable and everything feels solid and stable. And I was like, uh-oh, you could just stay in that and like not have any tension or pressure to grow you. And I guess that was probably a little bit of an activation that brought on the vision to shift and change things into a whole new world and a whole new reality, bringing all of my aspirations into life and what will be my very much new normal, because that's what I've been working towards. And so, yeah, I remember going, I feel content. And the first thing that my brain said was like, uh-oh. I know that sounds a little unusual. And anyone's like, oh, all I want to do is be content. And I'm like, oh my God, the last thing I ever want to do is be content. So, yeah. And I think the conditioning and, you know, the whole like society has projected for so many years the ideal of success being, you know, having a stable job, having regular income, owning your own house, being in a long-term relationship that has become a belief, whether it's actually your truth or not. And I think, you know, there are so many different ways now. That was probably a lot more of the majority when I was younger, but it's still an undercurrent that I think confuses a lot of people. And, you know, we need diversity. Just like nature has extreme diversity, humanity has to have diversity. And actually, that's a really good point. There was this new ad that I saw on I was flicking through the TV down here and there was some Australian channels that I never see or watch. And I flicked on the SBS and there was this ad that came on, which is obviously very new and a reaction to the Bondi situation about diversity and acceptance and fight against hate, which seems like an oxymoron, to fight against hate. Maybe we need to transmute hate. But the hashtag was fight against hate. And just, it's so weird. Racism and culturalism and religionism in Australia, because it really has only ever been a multicultural soup from the beginning. And those often white men that bark against multiculturalism forget that. Actually, I had a relative once whose mother was a Polish immigrant, and he used to be really vocal about immigration and racism and stuff. And I was like, you're first generation immigrant kid. Like, what are you talking about? Oh, it's really funny. I seem to forget that it may not apply to them if they have different views. Anyway, yeah, diversity and, no judgment to what anyone's truth is of what the life that they want to live. My life is very, 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 very clear on freedom and venture and diversity that brings opportunity for evolution, which is my full-time job. Anyway, my love, I'm going to finish up there. And that's that. Thank you so much for listening. I am so grateful. And my website, which has next year's 1-year container information on it, www.Nik.xoxo, Nikstaar. Much love and merry everything to you. Mwah.